securely or pay the cashier at any vendor's point of sale machine. Safer than cash. Just tap and go for quick payment. Plus, get transaction alerts to monitor your smart card activity. Bank smarter with the ACB Smart Card.
Gittens Pharmacare, the pharmacy that cares. Halifax Street, St. George's. Affordable access to care, a wide range of prescription drugs, medical supplies, health and beauty items, diabetic testing supplies, immune system support products, vitamins, supplements, and lots more. Visit us today or call 440-2165. Ask about or call in prescriptions, discounted items, and special delivery requests. Gittens Pharmacare. Care, convenience, expertise. We've got it all. This program is brought to you compliments ACB Grenada Bank, Simply Smarter Banking, and Gittens Pharmacare, the pharmacy that cares.
So you've got the new ACB Smart Card. Around the corner or around the world, you can withdraw cash from any ATM displaying a Visa logo. You can also use it to shop online securely or pay the cashier at any vendor's point of sale machine. Safer than cash. Just tap and go for quick payment. Plus, get transaction alerts to monitor your smart card activity. Bank smarter with the ACB Smart Card.
Gittens Pharmacare, the pharmacy that cares. Halifax Street, St. George's. Affordable access to care, a wide range of prescription drugs, medical supplies, health and beauty items, diabetic testing supplies, immune system support products, vitamins, supplements, and lots more. Visit us today or call 440-2165. Ask about or call in prescriptions, discounted items, and special delivery requests. Gittens Pharmacare. Care, convenience, expertise. We've got it all.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of Interesting Grenadians. Today we feature none other than John Angus Martin, historian, author, archivist, and lots more. Angus, it's really great having you on the program. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I guess most of my memory actually goes back to Williamson Road, even though we actually lived on Lucas Street. Mm-hmm. I think it was Cox Alley or one of the alleys. When I was probably around 3.5, 4 years, we left there to go to Williamson Road. So basically, most of my memory of living in Grenada for about actually 10 years in Williamson Road. I would say, as everybody might guess, I have connections to Monkmorris. Actually, I was born while my parents were living in Monkmorris, so my siblings used to tease me that I was the only other Mong in the family because all of them were born and lived in St. George. Most of the connections to Monkmorris was going there to visit. Mm-hmm. I don't remember anything when I was there just before I was a year old, I think, before we moved back to St. George's, but going to the garden, my father's garden, called the Gully, and he had a cocoa farm and lots of other things there. And we used to go and visit and stuff and do different things in the garden.
Tell us a little bit about brothers and sisters. Do you have brothers and sisters?
I am one of six, mm-hmm. One sister, elder sister, and 5 other brothers. We, like I said, we're from St. George's, growing up just above Bell Hill, mm-hmm. Grenville Streets, Williamson Road. Right. Most of us went to PBC. Wayne, my eldest brother, or Squingy as he was called, he went to GBSS, mm-hmm. And was known as a runner back in the day. Mm-hmm. All the others my sister went to high school, and I went to PBC. Mm-hmm. Presentation Brothers College.
What primary school you went to? Did you go?
I went to Palmer School. I think because because we were Catholic, mm-hmm. you had to go to the Catholic school. Mm-hmm. So we ended up going to Palmer School, and all my brothers went to Palmer School.
I guess at some point your family migrated from Grenada, to the US. Mm-hmm.
Right, like I joke, Grenada, one of our exports of people. When I was 14, going on 15, my entire family, I guess, went to Brooklyn.
What was the experience for you when you first arrived in the US?
I think the initial stuff was excitement, just going to the US. I went up in November. It was cold. Snow came soon after. I think all of that was really exciting, but it was scary. I think from taking a kid from a place, a high school, where there were less than 200 kids, and the high school I went to in Brooklyn, Wingate High, was over 3,000 students. It was scary as hell, just being thrown into that environment. And Wingate was not one of the nicer schools, to put it mildly. I think we were one of the first to get
Meaning what?
It was not the safest. Yeah, we had a police car that was parked outside of the school every time you let out. I think we were one of the first that got metal detectors when they came in the late 70s, early 80s. So no, it was pretty scary. But I think for me, it was probably the first opportunity to get to know Caribbean people, because we actually used to call it West Indian High because there were so many Caribbean people. I think Haitians and Jamaicans, of course, dominated. But I hung out with people from everywhere. I got to know people from all the islands for the first time, really.
So you did go to college, and which university did you go to?
I started off as an engineer because I was good in math and stuff, and they're like, oh, try engineering. So I went to Polytechnic Institute, which is now Polytechnic University of New York. It's an engineering school. I spent a year and a half there, and it was really bad because I was not cut out to be an engineer. I think, and I ended up transferring to SUNY at Stony Brook to study biology. Switched to biology. I thought I was going to do like something like dentistry or whatever, because I knew I couldn't become a doctor. It was not in my cards. I picked biology, and luckily for me, I went in the second semester, which is the spring semester, and the biology class offered then was plant biology, basically. And that basically changed my whole course because I liked the idea of studying plants. I think some of it was due to my background in Grenada, growing up and doing agriculture, watching my father, do agriculture and stuff, that I really had that bent towards plants. I really had a knack for plants, and I really liked the idea of studying plants. So I concentrated on botany, basically. And
how or when did the other stuff come about? Your interest in history and
well, it's a real roundabout way. I guess I graduated with a biology degree, had no idea what I wanted to do. And then I saw a poster that says, put your biology degree to work for you in the Peace Corps. So I'm like, okay, that sounds like a good challenge. So I ended up joining the Peace Corps and went in as an agriculture volunteer. And ended up, I was offered a position in Sierra Leone. And I ended up in Sierra Leone in the agriculture program, ended up teaching at an agricultural institute in the village, and I spent about a year and a half there, and then I switched sides because I was extending an extra year, and I ended up working for Foster Parents Plan International, doing agroforestry, helping to plant trees and firewood trees and things like that, and excellent experience. I think it's the experience that changed my life.
Change your life in what kind of way?
I think we joke in Peace Corps and say that Peace Corps messes up your life in a good way because it shows you, it teaches you a lot about yourself, actually, much more than you go and teach or because being in a different environment at such a young age, you're challenged in your beliefs and so, I do recognize the shortcomings of Peace Corps as a sort of, that here I am, a young, privileged American, going off to an African country and telling people, hey, this is how you can do in order to be like us, kind of thing. It's sort of colonial in a way. So recognizing all of this, but I still think nonetheless, the experience afforded me interactions with people and places that became instrumental in the rest of my life. And I think that is the thing I value the most, is all of these interactions I've learned and encountered throughout my life has really enriched mine, and I hope I have enriched theirs in these interactions and make life worth living. And that's the reason why we live. it's because of these interactions that we have with people. So I really value the Peace Corps experience because it also gave me direction, what it is I wanted to do in life and how I wanted to interact with the world and with people in general. And that was one of sharing experiences with people and sharing knowledge.
What is the main language spoken in Sierra Leone?
The primary, the lingua franca in Sierra Leone is Creole, Krio, which is a Creole. But Sierra Leone, I've read Julius Caesar in Creole. There's the Bible was translated into Creole. I think it's coming from the Caribbean, we can catch on to it pretty easily. It's probably the closest, I think, to Jamaican patois, but it's really its own language and its own thinking and feeling. So I really enjoyed Creole.
So give us a greeting in
just a simple greeting. Bade kusheo, like friend, hello, how you do, how the body, how the family them, how is your family?
So it's
basically 80% of it are English derived words, but they all are pronounced like you knows, this time knows, this nami mot, this na you is yeri with you, they say, kind of thing. So it's stuff you can pick. I picked it up quickly, but it took me a longer while to speak it. But once I did, I was considered a pretty good speaker, and I still speak it with my friends in the US here as well.
How did you eventually get back to Grenada?
I guess when I left Peace Corps and hung out in Grenada for a while and got back to the US, decided I was going to go back to graduate school. And I applied to graduate school, and I got into a program doing agricultural and applied economics. And while earlier on, I think while I was back in Brooklyn, again, because of the death of my mother, that I started doing family history. Because I really wanted to find out more about where I came from. I've always had issues of identity. So I really started exploring my genealogy. And I think in the process of doing that, I had an interest in learning about history, because in doing genealogy, I couldn't find much because there wasn't much on the history of Grenada. So I started exploring that. And in the encounter, I found a book on Barbados, which was the A to Z of Barbados heritage. So I actually went and I bought a copy of that book. And then in the process of doing it, I said, I could do one of this for Grenada, thinking I would take a year or two and write this book. So I started that book when I went back to university. And of course, the book took me a decade to do, not the 2 years that I thought it would. And in the process of doing all of that, I guess I started doing so much history and collected all these documents, because doing an A to Z basically is an encyclopedia of Grenada. And I started going deeper and deeper as I kept learning all these interesting events and details of history, politics, culture, everything. And I just got consumed by that. Like I said, it took me a decade to do it. I remember when I sent it off to Macmillan Caribbean in the UK, they said, yeah, we like that, but could you cut it in half? Because it was this massive manuscript. And they decided to publish it because they published the Barbados one, and they published one in the Bahamas, I think, around the same time. I think they had meant it as a series, but they only published that one. But I think that is what really got me into studying Grenada history, and I learned so much in putting that book together.
The other book that caught my attention was the one, and it just shows a linkage between your Peace Corps experience in Sierra Leone and the connection with Sierra Leone and Carriacou.
Sure.
So the Temne Nation of Carriacou,
right?
That connection. So tell us briefly a little bit about that book.
Okay.
And what inspired it.
Right. So when I was a Peace Corps volunteer, I was in a village, Makama village, just outside of McKinney. It's the northern part of Sierra Leone. And I lived among the Timni people. So when I started doing Grenada's history, when I returned from the Peace Corps, and I started looking at the big drum dance, and I saw the Timni, I'm like, wait, there must be some connection. There's just no way, you can have this as coincidence. So once I started looking at it, I actually contacted a former Peace Corps volunteer as well, who was a Peace Corps volunteer in Sierra Leone and had done lots of research on Sierra Leone and the connection between Sierra Leonean and the southern United States, specifically Georgia and South Carolina, looking at the Gula people who grew rice in those areas, the Gula Geechee they call them, and who spoke a similar language, to Sierra Leone. And I contacted him and say, hey, what do you think of this? Here is this connection. And he kind of dismissed it in the beginning, because he's like, maybe it's not what you think it is, kind of thing. And then later on, I came back again to him and I said, man, I really think there's something here. And he's like, okay, give it a search and let's see what comes out of it. And in the process, I found the connection was the Scots, basically the Scottish people that owned the slave island in Sierra Leone and that owned plantations in Carriacou specifically. And we're talking about Grand Bay was one of the ones that was owned by the Mills family, which also owned shares in Bunce Island. So we had this flow of Timne people, which is a small group of people in West Africa that shows up in Sierra Leone, in Carriacou, and remain as part of that big drum dance, this collaboration of these different nations or tribes in Carriacou, and 200 years basically kept this alive. And today that we can make these connections. So we ended up putting together this book, and we collaborated with other people, with the government of Grenada, government of Sierra Leone, and we brought some Sierra Leoneans to Carriacou as a sort of reunion, and that was staged in 2016, making that connection.
What do you think accounts for the fact that so much of the African heritage was maintained in Carriacou as opposed to Grenada? Is it the isolation, the lack of interest in the colonists in Carriacou? What is your thinking on that?
Right. Well, isolation definitely is one, because they were on much smaller islands, but also Carriacou Grenada maintained the plantation system much longer than Carriacou did. Carriacou was sort of abandoned. By the late 1800s, many of the planters and stuff have left and gone to other places. So you don't have that peasant plantation owner relationship like you had in Grenada, which wasn't broken until 1951 with Gary and Sky Red and such. Mm-hmm. So Carriacou was able to almost exist in their own little space, and that's why we see there's a more Grenadian environment in Carriacou than it is Grenadian. So they were able to basically continue to practice, all of the things that they were doing, they were allowed to do on their own in that period. So it was really not an issue for them in terms of continuing these practices.
Tell us a little bit about some of the other works on Grenada.
Right. Well, right now, I'm actually trying to finish up my dissertation. The title of the dissertation is We Nabel Stringberry here, Landscape, Biography, Representation, and Identity in Grenada. So I'm basically trying to tell the settlement history of Grenada from the Kalinago all the way to today, looking at how the landscape changes and how each group of people impact the landscape, and then how individuals identify with the landscape, how we create that sense of place, that sense of belonging, and the idea of how our parents and grandparents intended when they buried our navel string in connecting us to the land and to the place where we are. So that's what I'm looking at, because I think identity for me has always been an issue, because I've always felt a certain otherness growing up in Grenada. I think I was... people call me names because of my skin color coming from Montmorris, or having the Montmorris heritage. Mm-hmm. So I think it's always been sensitive, I guess. And we all have our identity roads to travel. We all have different things that we have in life. For me, it was on that level because of that's my specific heritage. Mm-hmm. So I spent quite a bit of my life working on identity. And that really, the dissertation is very different than many different dissertations in the sense that it's very personal. There's a lot of personal exploration in it, because that's what I bring to this. It's not just about identity, but it's about my identity and the exploration of identities in Grenada. across the centuries.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. As you talk about identity, I think of Montmaris. Tell me the connection, real briefly, the connection between Montmaris and Australia.
That is actually a good one. Just today I was reading a piece and I said, I need to put a footnote in, because people think that people from Montmaris, Grenadians generally believe that people in Montmaris came from Australia, but that's not the case at all. They actually came from Barbados. They were called the Montmaris Bajans. Mm-hmm. And in the 1860s, 1870s, quite a few of them come and start populating places like Grand Mall and Bouchejou, and then eventually move into the Montmaris area, became tenant farmers, and created the village of Montmaris. In the 1970s, quite a number of them went to Australia, because Australia back then had pretty exclusive racial policies. So if you could pass for white or was white, you could easily go to Australia. So many people from Montmaris went to Australia, among other places that they traveled to. Mm-hmm. But Australia was that different place that you had many people from Montmaris going to. And so that's the connection, but people tend to somehow I think it's the association with the fact that Australia was a penal colony, and from where many from the UK was sent out to Australia. And there's the association knowing that people from Montmaris are descended from other indentured whites that were sent to the Caribbean as well from the 1600s to 1700s into Barbados predominantly. And that's the connection, but it's a bit convoluted sometimes, but it's really, they were known up until the 1950s as the Montmaris Bajans.
And again, when you talk about Australia being the penal center, you mean that's where they send the criminals? That's what
prisoners, yes.
Send the prisoners to Australia. Right?
And of course, that term prisoner, when we, like I said, during the 1600s, to Barbados, someone became a verb in the UK. You stole a loaf of bread or you committed some real big crime. They said, okay, we can hang you or you can go to Barbados. Which one would you choose, kind of thing. So you ended up with, Barbados had a really massive white population in the 1600s. Many of them eventually went off to South Carolina, creating the Barbados-South Carolina connection and things like that. But like I said, it wasn't until the 1850s that they started looking into sending some of the poor whites from Barbados to other islands. Actually, the governor there had sent these letters off to the various governments, and one went off to Jamaica, and the Jamaicans said, no, thank you, but could you send us some of the Negroes instead? Mm-hmm. And Grenada, when they sent it off to Grenada, they said, well, maybe we could actually settle them up in Granny Tang, because that environment would suit their constitution better, So it's interesting to follow some of this. The scheme was never really followed up, but eventually I think most of it happened through the Anglican Church, where you have families that came to Grenada, and it's really about 12 families. If you look at the names, the Seals, the Searles, the Graves, the Dowdens, and those names, the Elms, those are the first families that came to Montmaris, and many of them are still, the names are still there. People like the Martins came in later on. They married into Chandler, married into with a Chandler, and now you have even our Commissioner of Police, from Montmaris. So I find it a fascinating population in Grenada to look at, and hope one day I can write about it, because it's so different from every other community across Grenada.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. Angus, tell me, what would you like your legacy to be?
I think what I do now, I write about Grenada's history. I think about Grenada's history. I think that's basically what I would like to leave, because I have been fortunate enough to meet really interesting people, traveled quite a bit, learned a lot about Grenada in those travels, because we don't have archives in Grenada. So you have to travel in order to interact with Grenada's history, more or less. So I've been to France to go to the French archives to see old maps and old drawings of Grenada from the 1600s. You know, I've seen a drawing of Fort Royal, or what became Fort George, back in 1667, you know, and things like that. So I have this vast knowledge that I've gained and experience in Grenada's history, the National Archives, the Library of Congress. So I've compiled a lot of that data as well as knowledge that I hope to write about and to share that with Grenadians, because I think we don't know a lot of that history.
Angus, I think you certainly are doing just that and making a dent. And that's why we have you on this program as a very interesting Grenadian. Thank you for viewing this edition of Interesting Grenadians. Join us again next week as we present another interesting Grenadian.